Hey, and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, joining you today live on Thursday, October 10th. We are in officially week 6 of the NFL, and that means we're going to preview tonight's game, the Thursday night game between the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers. We'll kick off the show by previewing that and talking about the situation surrounding both teams in this game. Also, on today's show, we're going to mention how Texans wide receiver Nico has wound up on the IR and the impacts that is going to have on the Houston Texans, plus also looking a bit closer at the matchup between the Browns and the Eagles. Not so much on the game, but they're two quarterbacks, two of the guys being mostly criticized mainly this year based on their performances. So we're going to get into those guys, plus some more down the line as well. Please make sure to stick around for those topics. But before we get started, I'd like to mention to you guys, if you guys want to get involved and you guys have any questions, comments, or opinions you want to share, we always would love to hear what you guys have to say. Your input and insight is a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and insight. So regardless about whether it's anything you have to say on any of the topics or anything just regarding the NFL, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. And now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and you want to drop it in the chat so I can read it and feature it on the show, there's an easy way to do that now just by using the Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel, and we rely on your support to keep bringing you guys this content, and we always appreciate it whenever you guys are part of the show, but also helping out any which way you can. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, hit the Super Chat button with the new Super Chat feature and get involved with the show. But now, we're going to talk about tonight's game before we move on to any of the other topics I have in store for you guys, because tonight's game is pretty big already, in week 6. We're not too early in, but, we're not even halfway yet, and there's already some potential switching of the seedings based on where these teams are in their division, just because we have another huge division game tonight between the Seahawks and the 49ers. The 3-2 Seahawks are coming off of back-to-back losses, their most recent one coming on Sunday against the New York Giants at home, 29-20. And, they're going to host the 49ers, who just gave up another comeback loss to the Arizona Cardinals this time around. First, they did it against the Los Angeles Rams on the road, and now they were home, and still the Cardinals were able to come back by over 10 points. I want to say it was 14 points or something that the Cardinals overcame, obviously, in the second half, and surprised everyone by beating them in that game. So what I meant before about the stipulations, the circumstances that surround this game, it has a lot to do with the seeding. And Seattle currently still have a winning record. They're the only team in this division to have a winning record, actually. So they're still in first place because of that. But if San Francisco and Arizona both win, and obviously the 49ers are beating or are playing the 49ers, the Seahawks are playing them tonight, obviously. If they were to beat them and the Cardinals were also get a win, this picture could look a lot different, because say the Seahawks lose tonight, right? They'd have the same record as the 49ers, right, at 3-3, but still they would be ahead of them, because the 49ers currently right now before kickoff stand at 0-2 in the division, and if they were to win, obviously they go to 1-2. But the Seahawks would be only 0-1. This is their first division game of the season, so they would still technically be ahead because they have a better division record for the time being, and they have the same record. So Seattle would still technically hold on to that number 1 spot, even though if they were to lose tonight. But then we'd have to fast forward to Sunday, where the Cardinals travel to Green Bay and they face the Packers, obviously, right? Let's say they win. Now they'd also be 3-3, but the biggest difference is they've already played 2 division games. They blew out the Rams, and they just won a big game last week against the 49ers. So because they have a undefeated record in the division, and if they were to win the Seahawks were to lose and the 49ers were to win tonight, they'd all be at 3-3, but the Cardinals would actually be in first because of that division record. And, at the beginning of this year, nobody would have ever thought the Cardinals would have been in that position at all this year. But that's where we stand right now. And it kind of just reminds me and brings me back to the point I made, I want to say yesterday or the episode before, where there's a lot of just what seems like impossible or shocks everyone when it happens. I was trying to make the point that this season feels like a lot of that stuff that seems surprising is becoming pretty, not routine, but it's not as unlikely as it was in previous seasons, at least in my opinion. So it makes it exciting, and it puts a lot more emphasis on these types of games, which always makes it better. And hopefully we see a better game tonight out of these two teams. San Francisco, at the time I made this, were 3.5-point favorites at the moment. They've actually moved now to 4-point favorites that I'm looking at it now. So still a pretty reasonable margin of victory there for the 49ers. But looking at this contest a little more broadly, Seattle leads the overall series 30-22, but San Francisco has won the last 5 games dating back to 2021. But also, for what it's worth, Seattle is 24-7 in primetime home games since 2010, so they certainly step up to the plate and more often than not deliver when they are in primetime. It is in Seattle, and I know it's a new regime and everything like that, but they've definitely surprised a lot of people already, the Seahawks have. So, that could be something there. And they've already put on a lot of great games. A lot of the good games that we've seen so far have involved the Seahawks or have involved the 49ers. So hopefully we're in for another one tonight on Thursday Night Football. And looking now more of these teams at a range of just offense and defense, right? Because I thought it was interesting where these two teams rank in terms of their, overall offense, overall defense, scoring offense, and whatnot. I felt like it told the story, and it told a way that you could see either team winning based on the story so far of the offenses and defenses of this game. You look at the 49ers first, their overall offense, they're second overall in overall offense, they're 7th in rushing offense, and they're 4th in passing offense as well, while they're 10th in scoring, where the Seahawks also don't fall that far behind. They're 7th in overall offense, and they're 3rd in passing offense as well. We've seen that pretty distinctly so far this year with Geno Smith. It's a big reason why he's performing so well, because that passing offense is actually legitimately that good. So that was something that I found interesting. Also on the defensive side is really where we get to see some potential distinctive points that can lead us to get a feeling of who could have an advantage in tonight's game, right? Because we look at the 49ers defense, they're 10th overall, they're 9th against the rush, they're 12th against the pass, and they're 13th in scoring defense, while the Seattle Seahawks, they're just right behind them. They are 11th overall, they're 20th against the rush. That's the biggest difference out of all these categories, and they're 7th against the pass and 18th in scoring defense as well. So the biggest difference made in these categories is the rushing defense, and that points you to me, my biggest point about this entire game is how the Seahawks try to defend the run, obviously, because they're not playing Christian McCaffrey, right? We don't really know when he's going to come back, but Jordan Mason has been at least as good of a replacement as you could have ever thought the 49ers could have had. And we saw the Seahawks last week, right, give up 129 rushing yards or something to Tyrone Tracy, a rookie running back for the New York Giants. The week before that, the Lions are good, but they allowed a lot through the ground. David Montgomery had a day. Jahmyr Gibbs had a day. So this is a habit now, I would say, for a deficiency for the Seahawks defense that I feel like the 49ers can certainly take advantage of, hopefully more than they did last week, because last week, talking about, scoring touchdowns and maybe running a couple of them in, the 49ers last week were 1 for 6 in the red zone in terms of touchdowns, and you could at least point to that inefficiency a little bit, the fact that Jake Moody got hurt, but we are talking about touchdowns, so that is something to point out, because it wasn't just one game, because so far through the NFL season, the 49ers rank 29th in touchdowns scored in their red zone drives. They're scoring on about 41% of their red zone drives so far, whereas last year they were actually number one and scoring on 67% of their red zone drives. So a pretty distinct fallout there by the 49ers. But still, I think that's the direction to go for this team, because you look at the injuries that they have, the Seahawks do. Nwosu was placed on the IR. He's one of their defensive linemen. Byron Murphy, their rookie defensive tackle, is also not playing for the Seahawks. And their edge rusher, Boye Mafe, up until now, I haven't seen any of the inactives, or it hasn't updated for me yet. So he could or could not play. Those are some big pieces missing on that defensive line. And, looking at those matchups, it falls right in line with that, because the San Francisco running game going up against the Seattle run defense is going to be a huge matchup to determine this game. San Francisco's pass catchers going up against an injured secondary for the Seahawks. There's not going to be any of Reek Woolen or potentially Julian Love, two starters for the Seahawks. So that could swing the momentum in either direction, or more so to the 49ers, right? And lastly, Seattle's offensive line against the 49ers pass rushers, because we saw last week how easily the Giants were able to get pressure on the Seahawks. So monitoring that, and it's hard to get worse than that, but it's something that I'm sure the 49ers have obviously taken notice of, and that they're going to send the Nick Bosas after them and whatnot. So how successful they are, or can Seattle bounce back from that? It'll be a huge decider into who wins tonight's matchup. But now we are at the part where I have to predict, and I kind of wanted to go in favor of Seattle because of the home record and everything like that, and I really do think they're a good team, but I just feel like that run defense really scares me, especially with how successful the Giants were. No shade on the Giants, but that's a lot. That's a lot to give up to any team, but the Giants, the way that they were trending, no Malik Neighbors, no Devin Singletary, and you still gave up 130 yards. That's worrisome for me. That's something that I can't accept if I'm going to pick the Seahawks. So I'm going to go with the 49ers. They have a losing record right now, obviously, but still, I feel like the comeback losses are bad, right? They're bad. They're a bad look on their defense, which definitely gives me more cause to pause than it has in recent years. But, obviously there's no Christian McCaffrey. And if Jake Moody plays last week or he doesn't get hurt, you probably win that game. And this game tonight isn't as big as it is probably, but still, because you obviously didn't win, now this one becomes that much more important. And I feel like the 49ers certainly have the talent to get over the hump and win this matchup, and I'm not so sure the Seahawks are healthy enough to keep up with the 49ers. So I'm going to go with them tonight. It's probably going to be a close game within that 4-point margin that the betting sites gave. So we're going to go with the 49ers. They'll go even and tie up the series, or tie up the lead in the division records. And hopefully, if the Cardinals win, it'll make things a lot more interesting. So we're always rooting for that to make it a little bit more competitive and exciting within the divisions as well. But for right now, we're going to take a break from the show, and when we return, talking about some injuries, we're going to talk about the Texans placing Nico Collins on the injured reserve because of a hamstring injury, and how that could affect the Houston Texans negatively, obviously, with all the injuries that they have, but also how it could open up an opportunity for a fellow wide receiver to take advantage of. So we'll be right back with that. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Jumping right back into the action now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, we're going to discuss the Houston Texans because last week they got a big win, a great win over the Buffalo Bills, 23-20. But the very unfortunate news came this week in regards to their wide receiver, Nico Collins. Their top wide receiver, Nico Collins, has officially been placed on the injured reserve and will be required to miss the next 4 games until the Texans are able to reactivate him and have him come back to practice and integrate him again back into the team. So, a big blow, obviously, because Nico Collins was playing very well this year. He was playing at a level that I wouldn't say that people didn't expect him to reach, but it's at a pace right now where with Stephon Diggs, with Tank Dell, with Joe Mixon, I know he's hurt right now, but still, when he was in there, it was a pace that I don't think a lot of people would have expected Nico Collins, of all the wide receivers, to be on at this point in the season. You know, the Texans are 4-1. They're playing great on offense. CJ Stroud's looking very good. All that stuff was kind of expected, but who was going to distinguish themselves out of that group of wide receivers? I thought it was interesting how Nico did it very seamlessly, it seemed like. And in this game against Buffalo, in the first half, he scored that 67-yard touchdown. But to me, the way I was looking at it, he kind of looked like he got hurt in that play, and I don't know if that's confirmed or not, but it looked like when he got into the end zone, he sort of tweaked it or was hobbling on it, being a bit ginger with the way he stepped on it as well. So it looked just a little bit weird, and afterwards, obviously, he went into the locker room. They did the tests on him, and he didn't return after that play, after that series. So dealing with a hamstring injury, it's one of those where it's kind of like an ankle or like an Achilles, you know, the tendonitis with Christian McCaffrey, right? It's always one that I'm always most nervous about because once you get like the knee injuries, right, those are a bit more clear cut in knowing, you know, that it's going to require surgery or not, or is it just going to be season ending or something like that, or are they going to be able to play again this year? But when it's something like a hamstring or an ankle, you could come back, you could be feeling better on it, but I feel like there's always a greater risk of re-aggravating it with these soft tissue injuries. So that's really what would scare me the most. But because he's now on IR, you know, you hate to see it based on how well he was playing, distinguishing himself from Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs, it appeared like. And overall, compared to the rest of the NFL, Nico Collins, through 5 weeks so far, led the NFL in receiving yards. He was tied for third in receptions. He scored 3 touchdowns and had 8 receptions of at least 20 yards or more on the season so far. So he was making a name for himself, not just between himself, Stephon, and Tank Dell, which was always going to be hard, like I mentioned, but in the NFL, I think a lot of people were noticing how, you know, CJ Stroud was finding it very easy to connect with Nico Collins. Not to say that it was hard or anything with Tank Dell or Stephon Diggs, but with Nico, it always felt like they were hitting for big plays or he was going to him when it mattered most. And they were building that reputation, and it was great to see because Nico, you know, signed that deal in the summer. He is locked in long term, so to kind of establish himself, it was always kind of nice to see it play out that way. But now it's obviously a big loss because of who Nico is, obviously, and how good he is, but also because of the Houston Texans' already pretty banged up offense, quite honestly, right? Because we talked about Joe Mixon. I'm a big fan of Joe Mixon based on the fact that in the first 2 weeks, I think he showed us everything that we envisioned he could be for this Texans team, right? Because in the first 2 weeks, I forget how many yards he had against the Colts. It might have been over 130 or something like that, but he played very well in that game, helped them get the win. And then in the second week, again, he played a big role in it, but unfortunately, he got hurt in that game against the Chicago Bears on a hip drop tackle that wasn't called. So people still feel resentful about that, right, with how big of an emphasis it was this year that they didn't call it. And now it's been since week 2 that Joe Mixon has not been able to play. And it's a big loss, obviously, and now heading into this week, you might have felt a little bit more optimistic, but he did not practice yesterday, and it just adds another day on of kind of speculating, guessing when Joe Mixon could come back. That's not the only one, though. You look at Dameon Pierce, their other running back. He was limited yesterday, but he also has been dealing with a hamstring injury like I talked about before. And it's been a couple weeks now that he hasn't been able to play. And again, you don't really know how it's going to play out with that hamstring injury, right? He's limited yesterday, but the next couple of days it could be sore and he might not play or practice, I should say. So that's another sensitive, touchy injury to kind of get a gauge on. Joe Mixon is an ankle injury, if I didn't mention that before. And it's not only that, but on the offensive line as well. You look at their left guard, Kenyon Green. He did not practice yesterday with a knee injury. Their left tackle, Laramie Tunsil, also didn't practice yesterday with an ankle injury. And their right tackle, Titus Howard, also, again, not practicing yesterday with, you guessed it, a hamstring injury, of course. So 3 starters on the offensive line. Their starting running back, their starting wide receiver, all are banged up and not going to play for, as a collective, probably for the next couple weeks. So if you're talking about any other team, it's very critical, right? It's very serious, right, when all these guys are injured. But Houston has the luxury of still having a guy like Stephon Diggs, obviously, and Tank Dell, who, talking on Tank Dell a little bit, I feel like he's the one that's sort of taken a back seat a little bit the most out of all these guys when Stephon Diggs arrived. And it's not to say that like when you say something like that, it feels like it's like a bad thing, right? That Diggs joined and now you're not getting the most out of Tank Dell, and it's almost like too much. You have too many good players. But I'm not trying to paint it out that way. It's more so of the fact that I just feel like, Stephon, it feels like he's a more urgent player right now because he is more of a veteran. He might not even be there next year. And how Nico's playing, it's hard to get the ball to everybody. But I feel like now this is a great opportunity for Tank Dell, because if you look at last year in his rookie season, he was on an awesome pace last year to really, contribute a lot. And it was a shame he got hurt last year, because who knows what kind of rookie season he could have had if he played the entirety of that year. And, this year, his best game so far has been a 5-reception, 62-yard game against the Minnesota Vikings, who they lost to. So now it's a great opportunity. You don't love to see it because Nico's hurt, but it's not a situation where, you have to panic and maybe bring someone up or start looking at other options. You have Tank Dell there and Stephon Diggs, which I'm sure a lot of teams would love to have as their only 2 options. The Texans have the luxury of having them on top of 2 other great options. So I feel like Tank Dell now can really use this time to be maybe the number 1 target for CJ, or be the number 2 instead of the number 3 potentially when Nico Collins is there. And kind of remind everybody what made him so special and what distinguished himself last year on the rookie season that he was having. So it's a bummer that Nico is hurt. I want to say that, but also I am excited to see what Tank Dell does with this opportunity as well. And over the next couple of games, we look at them at the games that Nico Collins might miss, or he will have to miss, actually, being on IR. It's this upcoming week at the New England Patriots. They should probably still win that game. Also, the following week after that, they're going to be in Green Bay. Tougher game for the Texans. And then they're home again against the Indianapolis Colts, where last time it was a close game. Now they'll be hosting the Colts in the third week of that. And their final game that Nico Collins should miss, based on the IR, is at the New York Jets. And based on how the Jets look right now, I would favor the Texans, obviously, in that game. And if worst comes to worst, the game after that will be at home against the Detroit Lions. So, I think it's important to stress now that looking at that schedule, this 4-game schedule that I had out here, I still expect the Texans to at least be favored and potentially win 3 of the next 4. And hopefully they have everybody back for that Sunday night game against the Lions in the 5th week of this injured reserve period that Nico Collins is supposed to miss. So, it is a bad thing, but it isn't such a dire situation, because I think after this Jets game. I forget what it was, but they play the Lions. They play the Cowboys. I'm pretty sure they play a couple other tough teams. I'll actually try to pull it up right now. But it's almost a little bit fortunate that Nico Collins, got hurt now. Ideally, obviously he doesn't get hurt, but it does come at a point where he could miss these next couple games and then be back for the real big ones. Because, like I said, once we go after this Jets game, we have that Lions game that Nico should be back for potentially. Then after that, they play the Cowboys. Then they play 2 divisional games with the Titans and the Jaguars. And they play the Dolphins, then the Chiefs, then the Ravens and the Titans to close out their year. But I think these next games are definitely manageable for them. They're definitely, other than probably the Green Bay game, all these other games are definitely winnable. And probably the Texans are favored in these games. So how they managed it. I will say, though, while they are still favored, their defense is going to have to sort of step up a little bit more, knowing that you might not have all your weapons on offense, right, obviously. So you got to be a little bit more disciplined on the defensive side of the ball, a bit more disciplined on offense, surely. You can't have the strip sack fumble, right, the interception late in the game against the Bills. All those little things that kind of hurt yourself, you got to cut some of them off a little bit and be more focused in, because you don't have the luxury of falling back on as many weapons as you did. So the defense has to step up. They can't hurt themselves. And the discipline around this team now, the margin of error has shrunk a little bit because of these injuries. So they got to be on their X's and O's about that. But still, it's not the end of the world. They have great talent still. And CJ's on a great trajectory. And that makes a lot of difference, obviously, when your quarterback is considered one of the best in the NFL. So I'm excited most of all to see Tank Dell. I think he will take this opportunity to remind everyone what he's all about. But in the meantime, moving on from the Houston Texans and their wide receiver, we're going to go back to talking about quarterbacks and talking about 2 of the most scrutinized quarterbacks so far in this NFL season, Deshaun Watson and Jalen Hurts. They're going to be looking at each other this upcoming Sunday when their teams face off, and we're going to be discussing, who needs to win this matchup more, who needs to play better more so than the other, and who do I think will play better based on how these 2 teams have looked so far. We're going to talk about those 2 guys in more of a spotlight on how their seasons have been going when we return after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss an interesting game. Not so much based on the outcome or the matchups and things like that like I usually do, but focusing really on the 2 quarterbacks in this game between the Browns and the Philadelphia Eagles. The Browns will travel to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, obviously. 2 teams that I think, looking at the beginning of the year and the offseason and training camp and how the Eagles brought in Saquon and how they were pretty much bringing everyone back, and the Browns were sticking with Deshaun Watson. They still had that same great defense. Kevin Stefanski is a great coach. We certainly expected a lot more out of these 2 teams compared to where they are right now. These were 2 of the teams that I'm sure a lot of people had penciled in to certainly be in the playoffs or at least be competing for their division, certainly. And we haven't really seen that to its fullest extent so far through the year. And it looks like these 2 teams not only are not performing, but are having a lot of issues within the organization, right? You look at the Eagles, that whole thing with Sirianni. Does he have the full trust of the locker room? Is he having a problem with Jalen Hurts? Have they addressed what Jalen Hurts said after their game against the Buccaneers? It all seems a bit murky right now within that organization. And for the Browns, similarly, right, dealing with Deshaun Watson and the off-the-field stuff with his contract, is that preventing them from benching him? Is Kevin Stefanski even allowed to bench him? Things like that are all speculative, of course, but they become more solidified when things aren't performing and fans are looking for answers and they're not provided, or it's kind of danced around. And that's where we get to these two quarterbacks, most of all because of the position that they play, but also on their displays that we've seen so far on Sundays out of both of these guys that have gotten a lot of criticism and have people seriously doubting them and their abilities and their capabilities of their play so far. Looking at Deshaun Watson and Jalen Hurts, obviously, it wasn't too long ago, which is the craziest thing, that we were looking at Deshaun Watson, hitting that superstardom level in Houston, carrying an awful roster and, being everything for the city of Houston and giving them that hope, right, that they found their franchise quarterback. But of course, things didn't work out as a lot of people would have hoped in Houston, and he wanted a trade. They came to the conclusion that they were going to trade him, and based on that, and based on the level that he was playing at so early on in his career, almost like Jaden Daniels is now, if we were going to compare to anybody, or CJ Stroud, if you will, he obviously gets traded to the Browns, and for whatever reason, right, we're not going to speculate what it is with Deshaun. We could talk about what that is for days, right? If it's mental or whatever it may be, right? We haven't seen that same Deshaun Watson that we've seen in Houston, still year 3 or 4, I believe, now in Cleveland, and it's a problem. It's a real problem because we don't really have the answer of how and why Deshaun has sort of dropped off like this. And also, talking about Jalen Hurts and talking about how not too long ago we were discussing Jalen Hurts bringing this Eagles team to the Super Bowl and outplaying Patrick Mahomes in that Super Bowl as well. Unfortunately, they didn't win, but it felt like a moment where Jalen, although the Eagles lost the Super Bowl, it felt like a moment where Jalen was really going to establish himself as the quarterback, as a prominent top 3, top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And now you're left wondering, from what we've seen so far through 5 weeks, what the F is happening with both of these quarterbacks, right? Both look like they've digressed potentially in a lot of people's eyes, but certainly they've done no more than at least plateau at the max level that we've seen them through their career so far, right? Deshaun has definitely not gotten better. We haven't even seen his peak level yet in Cleveland. And Jalen Hurts is another one that we're kind of waiting to see that Jalen that took this Eagles team to the Super Bowl, and it just feels like the decision making is off, or the offense doesn't fit, or it feels like it's close. It's not like he's playing too bad, but it's not the level that we saw in 2022 when they made it to the Super Bowl. So that's another big thing, because you look at this Eagles team and it seems like they have everything, right? You look at what they have going for them on offense, the offensive line, not really a problem. The wide receivers, certainly not a problem with both Smitty and A.J. Brown. The tight ends, great, Dallas Goedert. Running back, we're not even going to talk about Saquon Barkley, obviously. The defense is or has proven to be more of a liability, I would say, over the last couple weeks based on their performances. But again, by no means the worst in the NFL. I would probably put the Bengals or the obvious teams like the Panthers or things like that, the Cardinals, the Rams potentially with how young they are, under them. But still, with everything they have going for them, you don't really know where to put your finger on why Jalen isn't where he should be, right? You would still probably think that he should be getting better, but like I said, it looks like at most both of these quarterbacks have plateaued on their trajectory, which seemed to be going like in a straight line just upwards, right? But now they really hit a curve, and we're wondering why. And looking at their performances so far through 2024, looking at the categories of passing yards, passing touchdowns, interceptions, QBR, completion percentage, and sacks, both of these quarterbacks are no higher than middle of the pack in all of these categories, right? You look at, I would say, the most alarming ones, which is QBR. Deshaun Watson is last in the NFL in QBR with 21 on average, and Jalen Hurts is 13th with a 59.3 QBR through only 4 games compared to Deshaun Watson's 5 games. You look at the passing yards as well. Deshaun Watson is 26th in the NFL in passing yards with 852, and Jalen Hurts has 930 passing yards, and he's 23rd in the NFL in those categories. Passing touchdowns, Deshaun Watson has 5, which is tied for 17th, and Jalen Hurts has 4, which is 25th through 4 games as well. Interceptions, Deshaun Watson has 3, which is the 4th most in the NFL, and Jalen Hurts has 4 interceptions, which is the 3rd most in the NFL. And their completion percentage, not too great for Deshaun Watson. He's at a 60%, which is 29th in the NFL, and Jalen Hurts has a 68.2 completion percentage, which is 12th in the NFL. And Deshaun Watson has been sacked the most times in the NFL so far at 26, and Jalen Hurts has been sacked 13 times so far. And all of those numbers are obviously not good, not what fans of these two teams want to see so far through the year, and that's why individually and as a team, this game is so important to me, because how ironic both of these teams, both of these quarterbacks are having questions. The teams aren't looking great. The defense for the Browns is looking pretty well, but the offense is struggling. The Eagles, their offense is struggling for how it's built up. They're now going to be looking at each other across the field, and I think it's like kind of funny how it reflects on both of them. So that's why this game is so important, I believe, because not only are the Browns 1-4, the Eagles are 2-2, and they have to try and keep pace in their divisions as well. And, getting the win is obviously the main goal of this game. You don't want to make it too focused in on just these two quarterbacks, because the game obviously comes down to a lot more. But to really prove a point, I think, in this game, and I believe that both of these quarterbacks individually should be wanting to go out there and prove a point, their performances and how well they played, not just on getting the result, is also going to be looked at and dissected as well. And if we had to answer some of these questions like I had on here, who has more to lose in this game? If, say, Deshaun Watson loses, the Browns are going to be 1-5, so that's obviously really bad. If Jalen Hurts and the Eagles lose, they'll be 2-3, and based on how the Commanders are playing and the Cowboys still having a winning record, it looks a little bit dicey there in that situation. So, to me, who has more to lose in this game? I would say Deshaun Watson, just because he could get benched, and there's all that talk about this being the worst trade in NFL history, the contract that the Browns still owe him and whatnot. I know it doesn't directly affect him, but those are the things that are being brought up, right? The historical aspect of this trade and how bad it could truly be is something that I feel like Deshaun has to lose more of compared to Jalen Hurts, right, who obviously wasn't traded there or anything. And also in Philadelphia, if anything was going to happen, I feel like they'd fire Nick Sirianni first before even looking at Jalen Hurts. So he kind of has that leeway there. Sirianni's not in the greatest of feelings with the Philadelphia Eagles fans. A lot of them are pointing the blame to him. So I feel like they would fire Nick Sirianni first before they decided to bench Hurts or something like that. People are seriously talking about benching Deshaun Watson, so I feel like he has more to lose in this game. And also which team needs this win more based on their overall performances and just what it means for them. I would say that the Eagles need to win this game more because they're coming off of a bye, so that it makes it really hard to believe that they're ill-prepared when they've had all this time knowing that they were going to play the Browns. I mentioned before the division, the NFC East is still miraculously within an arm's length, right? The Cowboys are still right there, and the Commanders, right, they're 4-1, but they're so young. There could be that opportunity where something goes wrong, and how young they are, do they have the experience to kind of maneuver through those hurdles? So it's still right there for the Eagles. So winning this game, I believe, will go a long way, especially with how the Cowboys schedule plays out. The Eagles, if they win this game, would have the same record as them, and they could have a better outlook on their schedule because they don't play as tough opponents as the Cowboys do. And also, it looks like they're going to have everyone back in this game, right? Where against Tampa, there was no Devontae Smith, no A.J. Brown, as reasons why Jalen and this offense really didn't look that good. I still don't love the idea of them passing it as much as they did to start the game. That part's wrong, but the fact that they're going to have those guys back, the defense being doubted and being scrutinized as well, they have a point to prove. I believe that that whole motivation factor for the Eagles, I think, is going to be more a reason why they need this win more so than the Cleveland Browns. Because if the Cleveland Browns win, they'll be 2-4 and still in the AFC with the toughest schedule in the entire NFL. It's not going to move the needle too much for me, so that's also why I think the Eagles need this win more. And lastly, who do I think is going to play better and probably win this game out of Deshaun and Jalen Hurts? I would probably say Jalen Hurts, because he's got all the weapons back. Similar to what I just said about the entire team, it'll certainly help Jalen Hurts out more to have Smitty, to have A.J. Brown out there, and they should use Saquon more, but those guys obviously make a difference. They line up the boxes if Jalen decides to run it or if Saquon decides to run it, and they obviously get open a lot better, so I feel like that'll help him out more. That's going to be a refreshing sight to see for Jalen out there. I'm sure it'll take some of the pressure off of him as well. Whereas the Cleveland Browns and Deshaun Watson, they're not missing anybody. They're just playing at a very poor level with Jerry Jeudy in there, with Amari Cooper, with David Njoku back. Yeah, they don't have Nick Chubb, but we knew that going into the season, right? It's not like they lost him or anything like that. They haven't had him this entire time, so they're just playing at a poor level. Whereas the Eagles, you kind of have those excuses there to say that they don't have their top two wide receivers or things like that. So that's why I feel like Jalen is going to play better. He's going to have his guys back. They're at home as well, coming off of a bye. If they lose off of a bye to this Browns team, to how Deshaun Watson's playing, it's going to be, I don't know if I'd be more surprised with the Browns winning or the Eagles dropping that sort of game. So they better win this game or else it's going to get really bad. And maybe like Nick Sirianni could get fired if they lose this game. I don't think that's an overreaction, honestly. So they'll probably win this game. Jalen Hurts will play better if I had to pick one of these two guys, but certainly a big game nonetheless for both of these quarterbacks. And speaking about big games for quarterbacks, we talked about Drake May. The announcement came earlier in the week that he was going to be the starter against the Houston Texans. We're going to touch some more on that, what Gerard Mayo had to say about it, and what Drake May has to say going into his first start against the Houston Texans. We'll touch on that topic when we return in just a few seconds.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about a little bit more about Drake May and how he will be starting this upcoming Sunday against the Houston Texans. But quickly before I jump into that, I do have the inactive list for tonight's game that is set to kick off in just about an hour or so. For the San Francisco 49ers, some big misses. There's not going to be, obviously, Jake Moody because of that high ankle sprain. There's not going to be any of Charvarius Ward either. He is listed as inactive, and that's a big miss for the 49ers, obviously dealing with DK, with Jackson Smith and Jigba, and the passing game overall for the for the Seahawks, that's going to be a big miss. And also for the Seahawks, nothing too new. Reek Woolen, their cornerback's not going to play. Byron Murphy's also not going to play. And that's pretty much it for the big names from that team as well. Other than that, I don't think, or actually Julian Love is not inactive, so he is going to be playing in there as well. So the Seahawks and the 49ers missing some key players in that secondary. How that sways it, I'll leave that up for you guys to decide. But getting back to Drake May, we already talked about my feelings on this yesterday, and the moment is finally here, right, for New England and Drake May. As we talked about yesterday, he's going to be the starter against the Houston Texans, and while, again, I want to stress that I'm not happy about it, it's going to happen anyway. And why it's so important that this happens now, outside of the fact that I believe it's too early and the offensive line issues and all that sort of stuff that we talked about, it's because of the fact that when you make this move, when you draft the guy potentially for your organization, the idea of going back on it or having it backfire and having it all sort of blow up in your face, you really can't go back on this decision now that you've made it, right? Once he steps out on that field and he goes through that first play, that first drive, unless he gets hurt or something like that, it looks extraordinarily bad on the Patriots if somehow they revert back to Jacoby Brissett. And, what is that going to do for Drake May? I know that's like existential crisis kind of thinking, right? With Drake May, and he hasn't even stepped foot on the field yet. But I feel like it's important to mention that because at least you definitely shouldn't, because someone's going out there and, they're going to pay the price at least because of the idea that you can't go back on this decision. And that's why I bring it up, because of the idea that the action of going back to Jacoby Brissett, potentially, if Drake May, this whole experiment, maybe you did start him so early, if it doesn't pan out, something's going to have to happen as a circumstance for not planning this out properly. And what I mean by that is just looking at another similar situation back in 2020, you look at the Miami Dolphins, you look at Tua Tagovailoa in that game, and at some point in that year, they started Tua, they started the rookie quarterback, but obviously it went horribly wrong. Tua didn't play great, they benched him again for Ryan Fitzpatrick, and that whole switching throughout the season, it didn't look good on them at all. And not only that, afterwards, it was Brian Flores who ended up paying for it by the Dolphins firing him, obviously. So a decision like this is so important. Why I brought it up is because something like that could happen if this does backfire. And you look at the first-year head coach, Jerod Mayo, you think that his job's going to be secure if they happen to have to do that at some point this year. And in saying that, it goes back to the point that they're 1-4 and they're supposed to be bad anyway, but still, you're kind of messing with the with your long-term planning here with the future, right? Drake May, if you start him too early, it could shake up everything on how you had it planned out going 2 to 3 years down the line. This is your guy. This is the guy you picked at number 3 in the draft. It's not each and every year, ideally, that you're picking top 4, top 5, right? So when you do have the chance to do that, don't mess it up. And that's why it's so important, again, that I feel like still it's a bit early to start Drake May, but the Patriots now have to sort of die on that sword. And because of that, Jerod Mayo spoke on the decision to start Drake May and sort of what went into it. And this is what he had to say on your screen. He said, based on last week's game, it just wasn't good enough. Sunday against the Miami Dolphins, I thought we played well enough defensively and on special teams to win the football game. And there's that bit of frustration. I'm sure I'm not the only one that can notice it. Mentioning how you did everything on defense, basically. You did everything on special teams, and the only other side of the ball didn't perform, essentially, is what he's saying. So the quarterback is the main reason for that more often than not. So the frustration has kind of gotten to a point where you can't continue on like this, and they decided to go to Drake May now. And it makes sense, right? It's logical, but I go back to the reason I gave yesterday, where I like the urgency and I like the desire to win, but I feel like you could go a bit too far because, again, the Patriots were not supposed to be like 500 or 3-2, or like a Cardinals team maybe that has something going for them, but they're still not there yet. I feel like the Patriots are even further back from that, where they still need a lot of pieces to be where the Arizona Cardinals are at this point in time in their new project that they're trying to build, right? The Patriots are very new. This is their first year with a new head coach and really starting this new era after Bill Belichick. So they're probably right where they're supposed to be. So this idea that, something has to change now, we can't be 1-4, like, it's not a surprise to anybody, honestly. If you talk to anybody and you said that the Patriots are 1-4, no one's gonna ask you again, right? That seems about right where they thought the Patriots should be. Now, if you ask them about the Bengals being 1-4, then you get a reaction, right? Because that wasn't supposed to happen. But in this situation, it's logical. But again, you're dealing with a rookie quarterback, and you're probably where you should have been anyway. So, I kind of understand it, but still, I have my pushback on it. And Gerard Mayo also mentioned how Drake May's athletic ability will allow them to do some different things on offense, which is going to be better for them. A Patriots insider, Phil Perry, also emphasized that offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt believes it's vital, in his words, to scheme around his personnel. So, based on that, Phil Perry reported that we should expect to see more shotgun formations, more move the pocket sort of concepts that are going to help out Drake May, and where Jacoby Brissett obviously wasn't moving a lot, right? Because he is a veteran and he's not so mobile, obviously. So that is something to, again, get excited about, see something different, and maybe just try out something else. But it's going to be tough against this Houston Texans defense, right? It's all contextualized around who you're playing and what the matchups are, obviously, in that week. If this was their plan against the Miami Dolphins, I would ease up a little bit, right? But because we're talking about the Texans, and I know they're banged up and whatnot, but still, this is one of the top competing AFC Conference Championship type of games where, or type of teams rather, where, this team is where everybody wants to end up with a rookie or with a young quarterback now, getting all the pieces around him, right? The Patriots are nowhere near that, and the Texans are a good team. They have a great defense with Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson, Derek Stingley on that side of the ball, and a lot of great players just overall on that team. So to start Drake May not playing any action so far in the regular season against this team, it seems a bit panicked at this point. So they couldn't have held off one more week. That probably would have been a lot better. But, it's going to happen anyway now. And Drake May also had something to say on his approach, let's say, to this game, and how he's approaching and how he views it as well. Because Drake May also said in his press conference that, and then from there, don't try to hunt off-platform, off-play, off-schedule throws. I think just kind of feel it out and go play football. I think the biggest thing sometimes is you try to get outside of the pocket when you don't need to, and little things like that. So I like what he said there. It relates back to the point about Alex Van Pelt and trying to move the pocket and trying to get him a little bit more mobile. I like what Drake may say, not trying to overdo it, right? Because he wants to trust the guys around him. He wants to trust his offensive line, his skill players. That's also what he said in a separate statement that I didn't get a chance to put up here. But anyway, I like the sentiment around Drake May. It seems like he is willing to take what the defense gives him. Everybody says that. And, it's a good approach to have, right? It doesn't seem like he's too amped up about it, or it doesn't sound like he's trying to head into this Houston Texans game like with some crazy, unrealistic expectations, right? He said that, it's just kind of like a feel it out process, right? He knows that it's new for him. He knows that it's not going to be perfect. And that's the biggest message to stress in this moment, that he is going to mess up. No fans, haters of the Patriots should go into that game expecting there to be a couple mistakes, and for this not to look like a drastic change just because Drake May is in there, right? You're going from a veteran who might not have it all physically anymore to a young kid who has never played in the NFL yet. So there's going to be a lot of hiccups with this move, and you've made this decision now, so there's no going back on it, like I mentioned before. And it's more around the situation with the Patriots, right? It's not all on Drake May, because the offensive line, we have the problems with that. The skill position players, outside of Douglas and Kendrick Bourne potentially, aren't fantastic, and the defense is solid, but it's not a complete puzzle yet, and Drake May's certainly is not at a spot where he is the final piece of that puzzle. He needs to grow. He needs to be knocked down and get back up, obviously. So the expectations, people should limit them with Drake May going into this game and give the kid some time, because I feel like he has the potential to certainly be something for them, but you don't want to mess it up by having these crazy expectations on him, and then every other day he's hearing how he's a bust or he's not good, and everybody giving up on him before this situation obviously gets better. So that's what I wanted to say on Drake May, what the situation is like now. We got some insight from Gerard Mayo and Drake May as well, so all that's left to do is just watch how he does on Sunday. That should be a more of an interesting reason why we tune into that game, so I'll certainly be watching. But talking about these games coming up this weekend, we have to get to our game picks like we do each and every week, and talking about who we think is going to win from Sunday's slate of games. We got the first part today, and we're going to do the second part tomorrow like we typically do. So stick around and find out who I have winning these Week 6 matchups when we return after this quick break. Thank you for joining me here, guys, on this last segment of today's show, getting to our weekly game picks from Week 6 in the NFL. Part 1 is today, Part 2 is going to be tomorrow for the remaining 6 games. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into the matchups that we have for this first half of Week 6, and we got some more interesting games in this week for a couple of reasons, right? A lot of good ones. Starting off in the top left with the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Green Bay Packers. And I don't believe Green Bay will go scoreless in the second half like the 49ers will. I think with Jordan Love obviously getting back slowly, because he did come back very fast from that knee injury, but you can certainly tell, that interception he threw against the Rams was awful. A lot of people probably would have thought that it was Will Levis throwing that, not Jordan Love. That was very uncharacteristic from him based on what we saw last year. So I think he's still trying to get everything together, trying to have confidence in that knee, obviously, right? Because he is back out there, but it takes some time to get some confidence back in that knee and really move around like he used to. So with that being said, that's why I have a bit more optimism for the Green Bay Packers, and why I think this game will be a little bit tougher for the Cardinals. Their defense played well against another mobile quarterback in Indianapolis when the Packers defeated them. So, Kyler Murray coming into town, very different body build, right, than Anthony Richardson, but still dangerous with his legs nonetheless. And also Arizona played pretty well on the road. They've played pretty well on the road so far, with the game in Buffalo, beating the 49ers last week. So it's not your old typical maybe not taken seriously Arizona Cardinals, right? This is a decent team offensively with James Conner, with Kyler, with Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson making a name for himself as well. It's a pretty decent offense. So if you could take advantage of that offense and have your defense make a couple stops early, I think it'll definitely benefit the Packers, who I think will win this game. I think I believe in Jordan Love. He'll settle down a bit more than what he was last week on the road. And also, they're going to have Romeo Doubs back, which is a big missing piece that they didn't have last week and made the offense a bit more stuttery. So having him back there, his connection with Jordan Love, I think it's going to give them the edge over the Arizona Cardinals, and the Packers will win this game and will move to 4-2, if I believe now, on the season. And then also, moving just down the line, the Pittsburgh Steelers traveling to Las Vegas. A lot of quarterback news here. There's going to be a new quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders. Aiden O'Connell will now be the starting quarterback, where they benched Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew won the battle over the summer, but through the first 5 weeks, it hasn't been a solid performance week in and week out. It's been pretty inconsistent. You have games like you do against the Raiders, and then you have games like you do against the Broncos, right? Two completely different performances from not just Gardner, but the entire offense. And, head coach Antonio Pierce decided that now it was time to make a change, and he went back to Aiden O'Connell after he did start for them towards the end of last year. And on the other side of things, who's going to start for the Steelers, right? It seems like Russell Wilson is healthy now. He's practiced for the last 2 days now, I believe. And, Mike Tomlin hasn't necessarily deemed Justin Fields the starter. He said he's going to prepare like the starter to not mess anything up. But is that going to be the case each and every week? Or are they going to, dance around it sort of each and every week and leave us all speculating, right? It would be a lot easier for Mike Tomlin just to come out and say, Justin's our quarterback, or we're going to go with Russell. But I feel like Justin is and should be the guy going forward for a lot of reasons that I won't get too into right now. The wide receivers, a lacking spot on this offense. The running game, it is what they want to be their identity, but based on the performance, it has been anything but that based on how productive they've been with that. Their offensive line is all right, but there are certainly still some mistakes. And with Justin, this is a great test. This is the most ideal way to, I think, win over Mike Tomlin. I think if anybody wants to see a decision being made, this is such a game where I'm sure Mike Tomlin loves the idea that Justin Fields is coming off of back-to-back losses. Not literally, but I'll explain what I mean, right? I'm sure he loves the idea of Justin Fields coming off of those 2 losses, Russell Wilson now being healthy, sticking with Justin Fields, apparently, it looks like, against the Raiders this week. But the pressure now that Justin Fields must feel, potentially, with Russell Wilson, metaphorically breathing down his neck now, and, coming for his job. I'm sure Mike Tomlin loves the opportunity to see how Justin Fields operates now in such a pressured scenario where if you don't perform, you could lose your job. So I'm sure Mike Tomlin loves this opportunity. I'm sure he's still going to start Justin Fields, at least for this week, right? I'd hope. And he's really going to evaluate him now because Russ is healthy. There's no real other excuse to not play Russ unless you decide that you're really convinced by Justin Fields. So this is the perfect test to win over Mike Tomlin, to win everybody over. If Justin goes out there, plays very well, and they get more out of this offense potentially. But with all that being said, I'm going to go with the Steelers. There's not going to be any Devontae Adams. The offense is not as prolific as the Dallas Cowboys offense was for Las Vegas. They don't have the same names, obviously, so it's less to deal with, in my opinion, and there's not going to be any Christian Wilkins either. The Steelers couldn't make it more easier for themselves, so the Steelers better win this game. Justin will play. I think he'll play better, and this offense will look better, so the Steelers will win and go to 4-2. Then we look at the next game, the Jaguars traveling technically to the Chicago Bears, but this game is going to be in London. Another early kickoff at 9:30 over there, over the pond in London. Both of these teams coming off of big wins, right? Jacksonville finally getting their first win of the season over the Indianapolis Colts. And Chicago, after trending up after back-to-back weeks, they're now 3-2. They're coming off of those wins against who did they just play? The Panthers, and before that, it's escaping my mind. But, two important wins nonetheless, and although they are important, the Jaguars almost gave up that win away there towards the end where the Colts somehow came back like they did. Joe Flacco, right? Joe Flacco, right? He's playing crazy for being a 40-year-old quarterback, but still, the Jaguars, while they won the game, it wasn't overly convincing for me, and that's why I think in this game, I'm going to go with the Chicago Bears. Their defense is certainly better than that of the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts have moments where they play very well, but I think consistently overall as a unit, the Bears have a better defense. They have more prolific players on that side of the ball. I would say that side of the ball is their better side. So they're going to pose more of a challenge to the Jaguars, probably going to get to Trevor Lawrence a lot more, and it'll make it easier. I'm sure we've seen that over the last few weeks with how that's benefited Caleb Williams. He looks like he's getting things together, and that Jacksonville defense also doesn't look that impressive either. So I'm going to go with the Bears. They're going to go to 4-2 on the year, and keeping pace up in that race for the division in the NFC North. Now switching over to the other side, the Texans traveling to New England. We've seen a lot of surprises, and I've made the point on here that each week, it feels like any team could beat any team, but there is a limit to it, obviously, right? I even mentioned the Patriots as being one of the teams that doesn't feel like they could beat any team. It was the Patriots, the Browns, and the Panthers. So, unfortunately, in this game, although it is in New England and the Texans are, a little bit banged up, I'm still going to go with the Texans. I don't think Drake May's going to go in there and just beat one of the top contending teams in the conference. You just can't convince me of that right away for all the reasons I listed about this Patriots team. So the Texans will go in there. They'll win. It might be close for some time, maybe to start the game, but I feel like the Texans will handle it, and they'll go to 5-1. Then also, we talked about this game, the Commanders and the Baltimore Ravens, earlier this week. It's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. My favorite game of the weekend. The Commanders on a 4-game win streak. The Ravens on a 3-game win streak. Both, I think it was the two top offenses in the NFL so far. The Commanders and the Ravens. And it all come down to how well Washington can run the ball on the Baltimore Ravens' top-ranked rushing defense. So this clashing of styles, Lamar and Jaden Daniels, how similar they are, that's going to be one of the main talking points of this game. I love all of the narratives and how similar these two teams kind of are. And I did go with the Commanders in this game. I think they'll win. I think they'll surprise a lot of people. And I just like thinking of the idea that the following day, everyone's going to go insane that Jaden Daniels won this game. But I also have a lot of confidence in Jaden. I think he's going to be really good. And he's doing a lot. He can't do any wrong so far in the year, and I think it continues in Week 6. And lastly here, kind of also giving my pick away for this game, I took the Eagles. I think they're going to win. Both of these teams need this win very badly, but I think it all just comes down to the idea that Philadelphia, you can't help but notice the fact that they're missing their guys, right? Having A.J. Brown, having Devontae Smith certainly matters, obviously, right? Whereas with the Cleveland Browns, they have everybody, right? They're not missing anybody. They haven't lost anybody, really, is what I'm trying to say. Nick Chubb has been out for the entire year. It's not like you were playing great, you lost them, now you look very bad. They haven't looked good all year, and it doesn't look like they're going to get any better. And knowing that Deshaun is a big reason for that, and while Jalen Hurts is also facing some scrutiny with Deshaun, it almost feels like such a weird topic where you don't really know what it could be. With Jalen, at least you can point to the fact that he doesn't have his two top targets. And it could be Nick Sirianni elsewhere. But with the Browns, it doesn't feel like anyone's putting any blame on Stefanski or the offensive line or the wide receivers or anything like that. It all just falls on the lap of Deshaun Watson. So the fact that they're on the road again and the Eagles are coming off of a bye, it's too good for the Eagles not to win this game, not to get back on track winning games. But if they don't, it's going to be very bad for the Eagles the following day. It's going to be as bad for them if they lose this game as it's going to be as good for the Commanders to win the game against Baltimore. That's how severe, how important this win is for the Eagles, right? They can't lose this game. I'm not even going to think about them losing this game. It'd be almost impossible for me for that to happen. So I'm going to go with the Eagles. They're going to handle business and stay with pace with the Commanders as well for that division. So that's going to wrap it up for the first half of these predictions. We're going to get to the second half tomorrow, but that'll do it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Please remember to follow the show. Also, follow the network on all forms of social media. Like, comment, and subscribe to the show as well. Check out the GSMC Sports Network channel as well on YouTube for more content around the NFL in a variety of different ways with this show as well. And tune in every weekday for more of the live shows each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I've been your host, Manny Maradiaga. We're just minutes away from kickoff. Go watch the game, and we'll be back tomorrow to discuss what goes down on Thursday Night Football.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of